Hello again. Just read a rather interesting article on BuzzFeed News, and it's dated the 25th of October 2015. You really want to listen to this, and you really want to think about this. The title, Carson. That's Dr.Ben Carson. In 1999, white people have no grasp on history of racial violence in the United States. Quote, Black Americans, on the other hand, find it almost impossible to think about fairness or justice in anything but racial terms because of our nation's historical record of unfairness and injustice to our race, Carson wrote in the book, The Big Picture. In his 1999 book, Dr.Ben Carson wrote that our nation's history on racial injustices made it impossible for the black community to think of the judicial system in anything but racial terms, and the white Americans were only able to view racial violence in a modern context. In his book, The Big Picture, released by Dr.Ben, Carson argued white Americans had no grasp on the history of racial violence in this country. Carson wrote of a time his mother was thrown in jail for a minor traffic violation as an example of personal history of the racial injustice in criminal justice system. Can you sort of see what would happen if Dr.Ben Carson was able to become president? This whole insane program that Obama started with dividing blacks against whites, whites against black, would continue. In his own words, Dr.Ben Carson said that. Now, you have to sort of try to put yourself into their position. Dr.Ben Carson grew up during violent times. It wasn't until the mid-60s that blacks were even allowed to drink out of the same drinking fountain. So as a young child, he was subjected to an awful lot of trauma, as was the chosen one, as was the Attorney General. Both Attorney Generals, Eric H. Holder Jr. and Loretta Lynch. Can you see why it's wrong to put people like them into power? They can't put it behind themselves. You know, I did a video recently about Dr. Carson, and I talked about how he seems to be in line with Al Sharpton as far as Al Sharpton's views are concerned. The more I look into Dr.Ben Carson, the more people had better wake up about Dr.Ben Carson. You know, I was a fan of his. I thought he'd make a great president before the Donald ran. Then I thought he'd make a great vice president, being able to learn what he'd need to learn from the Donald. Now I think he would make a frightening either president or vice president. In his own words, in his own book, in 1999, you can't hide what he's not been able to hide. They have a distinct disdain for whites, which is why whites are an unprotected class. I'm sure this video is going to get a lot of thumbs down, especially from the blacks. But if the blacks were honest, they'd agree with what I said. There's a natural disdain for whites. Now this might change 100 years from now, but it's here in people like Dr.Ben Carson, in people like Barack Hussein Obama, that grew up and experienced what they experienced in the 60s. I have an African American friend. We shoot together Tuesday nights. He's told me stories about what he went through when he was a youngster. He too has to have a certain amount of dislike. He says not, and I hope not. If not, then he's a rarity. Young children that are black probably don't have as much disdain unless they've been corrupted by their parents. Dr.Ben Carson would be a mistake, because he would, again, I believe, continue to divide the blacks from the whites. You sort of know what I think. Read the article. There's a lot more that you might find to be disturbing about this presidential candidate. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think. You sort of know what I think, don't you?